There's a specific, subtle moment of cognitive friction that happens in a foreign museum or on an ancient street. Your eyes see the object-worn stone road, a hand-drawn map, a ledger of medieval hospital admissions. Your brain knows the facts. But your gut, your intuition, sends back a different report. It feels off, inefficient, underwhelming, almost disappointing. It doesn't inspire the awe you expected. It provokes a quiet, polite confusion, a sense that you're missing the point. This reaction is not a failure of the artifact. It is a failure of your historical imagination, a temporary short circuit in your perception. Today, we are going to diagnose this precise psychological phenomenon. We are entering what I call the historical uncanny valley, that unsettling space where the past is just recognizable enough to be familiar, yet its fundamental logic is just alien enough to feel wrong. By the end, you will not only understand the three mental filters that generate this illusion, you will learn how to switch them off and see the past, and perhaps even our present. With entirely new eyes, my perspective comes from years spent as a guide in the great and small. Heritage sites of Europe tin the echoing naves of Gothic cathedrals, within the damp stone walls of Norman castles, and under the bright lights of modern museums. My job evolved beyond reciting dates and names. It became an exercise in anthropology, in watching people see. And in that watching, I began to catalog a specific, repeating reaction from a particular demographic of visitor. It was never rudeness or open disdain. It was something more fascinating, a sincere, often subtly frustrated, bewilderment. A kind of polite cognitive dissonance where the evidence before their eyes conflicted with a deeper, unspoken narrative about how the world works and should have worked. Let me illustrate with three vivid memories that define the edges of this uncanny valley. First, the map. In a dimly lit gallery of Edinburgh Museum, a magnificent 17th-century cartographic work depicted the Holy Roman Empire in its dizzying complexity. A visitor, a businessman from Denver, stood before it for a long time, arms crossed. He finally turned to me, not with a question, but with a diagnosis. "It looks messy," he said, his tone one of genuine concern, as if looking at a flawed organizational chart. "All these little splotches of color. The borders are a nightmare. Why wouldn't they just consolidate? Merge the administrations, streamline the tax collection, create a unified market." In his mind, he saw a complex, centuries-old political and cultural ecosystem of electorates, bishoprics, and free imperial cities. And he could only interpret it through the lens of modern corporate mergers and acquisitions. His unconscious filter was what I call scale as logic. In this worldview, bigger is inherently more sensible, smoother is inherently more efficient, and simpler is inherently more intelligent. The glorious, chaotic complexity of the past, its negotiations, its local autonomies, its layered loyalties didn't register as a sophisticated adaptation to pre-modern technology and communication. It registered as static, as noise, as poor design waiting to be optimized by a competent manager. Second, the castle. This was in Normandy. At a fortress whose stones had been laid in the 1100s, the walls were worn smooth by 8 centuries of wind and rain. A father on a family tour, an industrial engineer from Chicago, knocked on the masonry appreciatively. "Solid build," he acknowledged. Then he leaned in, his voice dropping into a confidential tone, as if sharing a business insight. "So, what's the long-term plan here?" "The renovation roadmap. You've got great bones, but the user experience is terrible. You could add sleek glass elevators on the exterior, preserve the aesthetic, but improve throughput. Interactive holographic displays in the Great Hall. Maybe a themed gift shop and cafe down in the dungeon space. The potential visitor yield per square foot could be huge." He was utterly earnest. He did not see a preserved slice of time, a deliberate rupture in our modern flow meant to transport us elsewhere. He saw a development site with poor specs and underutilized assets. His filter was modernity as morality. In this framework, Newer is not just different. It is morally and functionally superior. Age, unless it is leveraged as a luxury brand heritage story, is a defect to be remedied. History, therefore, is not a record to be understood on its own terms. It is an early, clunky prototype, perpetually awaiting its final, optimized, user-friendly version. The idea that frozen in time is the entire point, the very source of its power, seemed not just sentimental, but a failure of vision and ambition. Third, and perhaps most revealing, the road. In York, England, you can walk on a short, exposed section of the original Roman road, the stones grooved by the iron wheels of countless supply carts. This is it. Asked a software developer from San Francisco, his voice flat with disappointment. This is the famous Roman engineering. It's just a glorified dirt trail with some rocks thrown on top. Where's the actual engineering? I launched into the well-rehearsed explanation. The deep, layered foundation of rubble and cement, the precise camber for drainage. The staggering fact that this path was one node in a network spanning thousands of miles, binding an empire together. He listened, then shrugged. Seems obvious. You need a stable surface, so you dig down and lay one. It's basic physics and material science. This encounter reveals the most insidious filter of all, the hindsight dismissal. Once a revolutionary solution becomes so universally adopted that it vanishes into the background of our world, we perform a psychological trick. We strip it of its genius, its context of radical invention. We mistake its profound, seamless integration into reality for simple, inevitable common sense. The brilliant becomes mundane. We stand on the shoulders of giants and complain that the view isn't any better. We look at the wheel and think, with a shrug, well, it's just a circle. These are not stupid questions. They are, in fact, perfectly logical. They are the predictable output of a specific, powerful historical operating system suddenly crashing against incompatible alien data. The individual is not malfunctioning. The software is encountering a file format it cannot read. So let's move from symptom to diagnosis. Let's open up the machine and name the three core cultural filters that generate the historical uncanny valley. Filter 1. The progress narrative, linear. National and recent. Many are raised, both explicitly in classrooms and implicitly in culture, on a story where human history is not a sprawling, branching, chaotic tree, but a linear sprint down a single track toward a specific, gleaming finish line. This story often has a very clear beginning, a frontier, a blank slate, a new world untouched by the supposed corruption and complexity of the old. From that starting pistol, the narrative accelerates in a straight line, overcoming obstacles through industrialization to a pinnacle represented by the latest technology. In this compelling story, impressive things are, by definition, modern. And woven into this narrative is a powerful, often unspoken, subtext that the ultimate expression of the modern, the vanguard of this linear sprint, is a particular national project. Therefore, when you stand physically before something that is undeniably impressive, yet also undeniably ancient and unequivocally not part of that national story, the internal software experiences a critical conflict. The core logic states, impressive equals modern. Modern equals our national project. The data input states, this is impressive and ancient, and from elsewhere. The system cannot compute ancient and impressive from elsewhere. To resolve the fatal error, the mind's defense mechanism is to downgrade the input. It must be flawed. So the 800-year-old university with an unbroken lineage of scholarship becomes, but is it still accredited? The magnificent aqueduct, a marvel of hydraulic engineering, is dismissed as just plumbing. The intricate system of collective agriculture is written off as sounds inefficient. The past is never evaluated on its own terms, within its own constraints, and toward its own goals. It is perpetually graded on a ruthless curve of modern, hyper-individualist, scalable, monetizable productivity. And on that curve, it always fails. Filter 2. The transactional lens, hyper-individualism as the default setting. This is the worldview where all value, all social logic, and all wisdom are filtered through a single question. What's the direct, personal, quantifiable exchange? It is the reduction of human relations to a ledger. I witnessed its stark effect in a museum in Birmingham. At an exhibit on friendly societies. These were voluntary, member-funded mutual aid groups from the 18th and 19th centuries, the direct precursors to modern social security and public health systems. A visitor from Ohio, a man who described himself as a financial planner, listened intently to my explanation. "Let me get this straight," he said, leaning forward. "People would just voluntarily put their money into a common pot, and then anyone in the group could draw from it if they got sick or lost their job, based on nothing but a handshake and their word." When I confirmed this, his face clouded with genuine professional concern. But the moral hazard is enormous. What's to stop a lazy member from just claiming sickness and draining the resources of the productive ones? The system incentivizes abuse. It's structurally unsound. For him, the concept of pooled, communal risk for collective stability, a radical and successful innovation in human social organization, was so alien it couldn't register as history or social innovation. It could only register as a poorly designed financial instrument, a naive model doomed to failure by rational actors. Cooperation looked like weakness. Interdependence felt like reckless vulnerability. Solidarity was a bug, not a feature. When your primary lens for viewing the world is transactional, any system not built on immediate, direct, monetizable personal exchange feels not merely strange, but irrational and foolish. Filter 3. The comfort of the default. My tools are the world's rules. This is the most subtle and powerful filter. The confusion of familiarity with objectivity, of local comfort with universal law. I experienced it while discussing the metric system at a science museum. A visitor chuckled and said, "I get the math, but feet and inches just feel more natural." He didn't mean they were more logical for calculation or international trade. He meant the distance from his elbow to his wrist was ingrained in his muscle memory. When your cultural framework is not just one among many, but a dominant, globe-spanning force economically, militarily, linguistically, digitally, a profound shift occurs. Your local comforts, your idiosyncratic measurements, your unique political structures, your particular economic assumptions. They stop feeling like one set of tools developed under specific historical circumstances. They start to feel like the default settings of reality itself, the way things naturally are and should be. They become invisible. So anything different feels consciously contrived or forced. This is why a narrow, winding medieval street isn't seen as a brilliant adaptation for pedestrian life, defense, and shade in a world without cars. It is diagnosed as a traffic flaw. A roundabout isn't seen as an elegant traffic solution. It's a confusing circle. The past, in this view, isn't operating under a different set of rules for valid reasons. It is simply incorrectly configured, like a computer running an outdated and buggy operating system. The cost of living perpetually in this uncanny valley is not merely getting a museum plaque wrong. It is a profound and dangerous poverty of imagination that actively limits our capacity to navigate the present and envision the future. When we dismiss the Roman road as just rocks, We lose the ability to recognize true engineering. Elegance, the art of solving a vast, complex problem, moving armies and goods across a continent with minimal, durable, locally sourced resources. We become connoisseurs of spectacle over substance, favoring the bombastic over the resilient. When we scoff at the medieval guild system as protectionist and inefficient, we blind ourselves to the alternative human realities it contained. Deep mastery through years of apprenticeship. Direct accountability for quality enforced by community reputation. And an economic model that embedded the worker within a web of social and material support. We then look at the isolation, precarity, and burnout of the modern gig economy and can't imagine any other way. Because we've been taught that the guild was just a primitive obstacle to progress, when we hear collective, water rights, or public commons, and our brain instantly supplies the word socialism as a conversation ender. We have crippled our own toolkit for solving collective action problems. We face a future of climate crises, resource scarcity, and pandemics that demand cooperative, long-term, supra-individual solutions. Yet our dominant historical narrative has systematically deleted all successful examples of such cooperation from our mental library, labeling them as failures or aberrations. We stare at the cliff's edge, convinced the only path is the one that led us here. Unable to see the other trails once blazed on the map we threw away. We become, in essence, prisoners of the present moment. We mistake our current, highly particular set of solutions developed under unique conditions of fossil fuel abundance, specific geopolitical dominance, and recent technological bursts for eternal, self-evident truths. This is the ultimate danger of the uncanny valley, a culture that venerates only the new. The big, the fast, and the personally profitable may one day find it has built its dazzling, complex city on a foundation of sand, while having spent generations systematically teaching its people to mistake the solid, varied bedrock of human experience for worthless, outdated rubble. The most telling moment. The crack in the valley wall always comes at the end of a long tour. After the questions about Castle Wi-Fi, the puzzled looks at thousand-year-old accounting ledgers, the debates about why they didn't just make it bigger, someone in the group grows quiet. The furrow in their brow shifts from confusion to a dawning personal realization. They're not looking at the artifact anymore. They're looking inward. And they ask, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Why was I never taught any of this?" That heavy silence afterward is the sound of the uncanny valley splitting open. It is the visceral, unsettling realization that the history you were given, the story you absorbed as the neutral account of how things came to be, was not the story of humanity. It was your nation's origin story, a compelling, motivating, simplified saga where the messy, magnificent, confounding, millennia-long prologue from the rest of the human race was neatly edited out to make your Cisne civilization's entry feel like the inevitable, glorious climax of the plot. So, how do we treat this glitch? How do we reboot this historical operating system? The treatment is a conscious practice, a new way of seeing. First, practice productive discomfort. When something from the past triggers that gut feeling of "this is wrong, stupid, backwards," hit the mental pause button. That feeling is not your intelligence assessing the past. It is your cultural filter activating. Interrogate the feeling. Ask wrong by whose standards? Inefficient toward what goal? Stupid compared to what? Make the implicit modern benchmark explicit. Separate the artifact's actual function from the function you assume it should have had. Second, look for internal logic, not familiarity. Abandon the primary question of, "Why isn't this more like my world?" Replace it with a detective's set of questions. What specific problem were the people who made this trying to solve? What brutal constraints were they under, material, technological, ecological, social? What did victory or success or a good life mean within their value system? The cramped street wasn't for cars. It was a defensible choke point and a source of cooling shade. The messy map wasn't inefficient governance. It was a dynamic, negotiated political ecosystem that balanced central authority with local power. See the world from inside the artifact, not from the outside looking in. Third, seek the adjacent possible. Understand that the past is the world's largest archive of human experiments. Most experiments failed, but within that vast catalog of failure and success lie billions of data points, millions of ideas about how to organize a family, govern a city, heal a sickness, honor the divine, or distribute food. These ideas are not worse than ours. They are different, forged in different fires. Your future, and our collective future, is not limited to the narrow range of options visible from inside the story we're currently telling ourselves. It can be radically informed, inspired, and cautioned by the full spectrum of experiments that came before. The solutions to 21st century problems may lie not in inventing something wholly new from thin air, but in rediscovering and adapting a forgotten pattern from a 12th century village or a 4th century monastery. The real, transformative cultural shock, therefore, is not the act of buying a plane ticket to go look at old stones. It is the vertiginous, exhilarating, and humbling moment you realize that you're present to your most deeply held assumptions. Your quiet values, your very sense of what is possible and impossible is built upon a story. A story that was carefully, often lovingly, constructed to simplify the terrifying complexity of the past in order to make your civilization's recent chapter feel central, inevitable, and destined. The thrilling work begins not when you accept that story, but when you decide to become a cartographer of a much larger, wilder, more interesting world. It begins when you choose to step out of the comforting, confining uncanny valley to wipe the filters from your eyes, and to see the past not as a foreign country, but as a vast, shared, and ongoing archive of human ingenuity, folly, and relentless adaptation. The map is there. The territory is vast. You just have to learn how to see it. If this journey from polite confusion to deeper understanding resonates with you, if you want to continue questioning the profound narratives that shape our minds and our world, then do this channel a great service. Hit the like button. It is the signal that tells the algorithm this kind of thinking is valuable. And subscribe to The American Storyteller. Now, I want to turn this over to you. In the comments, tell me, what is something from history or another culture that you once dismissed as primitive, inefficient, or bizarre, that you now see in a completely new and respectful light? Let's start redrawing that map together.